Now I'd like to welcome Earl. He's going to talk about his sort of tale of his parting with the Apple II. Thanks, Earl.
Yeah, thank you.
You ready to be sorry?
Yes, I'm hoping there's not too many tomatoes in the audience. Actually, before I get started with the presentation here, I wanted to say I've been chatting with Ken and others about KansasFest for a few years and have been wanting to make it out to one of these events. And I'm so happy that I finally have the opportunity. This has just been such a fantastic time so far. I'd like to thank everyone for being so friendly and welcoming me in. There's a lot of real veterans here at KansasFest, so it was a lot of fun. When I signed up, I actually got some email from Dr. Steve, and one of the things that he was curious about is folks who have taken a different path other than the Apple II, kind of what happened there. So I thought I would go ahead and share why I left the first personal computer that I had a chance to goof around with, and how I've eventually swung back around to that computer and using it again. So Ken and Andy told me I should do something interesting, but I decided to do this instead. And Carrington shared with me that you should always speak about something that you're passionate about. So I thought, I'll talk about me. My name is Earl. Yes, like a TV show. And it really is. I've been in Portland now for about 18 years, and before Portland, lived in Los Angeles for about 34 years. I've got one wife, 2 children, and 3 cats, and a partridge in a pear tree. And about 34 years of working in the computer field. So, wow, it seems like a long time. Some days it seems like it just got started, and other days it seems like forever, but you guys know how that is. How many actually work in the computer field now? Wow, almost everybody. And I knew from a very young age that I was going to enjoy technology. I used to joke with people that I was born with a keyboard in my hand, and people indicated that might have been kind of rough on my mother. Which my retort is that I was born cesarean, so it doesn't matter. It was an old style PS2 keyboard. It wasn't I love computers. I always loved them from the very first time that I saw them, but I do have multiple computer disorder. That just the eclectic path that I took, even from my early years in computing and all the way up till now, I'm kind of known somewhat as a Commodore enthusiast, and I mean, that makes for good repartee on the retro computing roundtable, that kind of thing. But actually, I'm more just a fan of computing in general. It hasn't been just a particular model or a particular niche. It's been, micros, minis, mainframes, and all sorts of brands. I'll share a little bit about why this happened to me. First off, technology. I was joking that I was born with a keyboard in my hand. It really wasn't a keyboard, it was a radio crystal. This is an early Radio Shack kit. It's the first electronics thing that I ever built. I was about 6 years old, if I remember properly. And I couldn't believe it. It's a radio that can pick up signals and it doesn't even need a battery. It's amazing, a crystal radio kit. I put this thing together, and it wasn't, I wasn't like most kids. I was special. So I put this kit together, and then I was thinking, how can I get better reception? My dad had a police radio with a big antenna on the top of the roof, and I said, hey, can I borrow your antenna? He's like, sure. So I unhooked it from his police radio and hooked it into this thing. Wham! All of a sudden, I could get stations from everywhere. And I was like, man, technology is cool, and doing things that are unexpected is cool. So I've tried to do both of those things all my life. I love tinkering with electronics. I admit, better at taking things apart than I was at putting them back together. Anybody else like that? Well, I've seen a lot of people here that are really good at putting things together. So.
Did you ever try using a Windows screen as an antenna?
No, I didn't try that.
Oh.
Is that a good antenna?
I don't know. I never got great results.
I should have tried that. I'm sure I tried it at some
take that little wire from your antenna wire from your radio,
Mm-hmm.
hook it into the Windows screen.
I don't know if I ever tried that, but I tried almost everything else. I love the Radio Shack kits. I had the 65-in-1 kit. And so you just rewire with these springs here, all of the components were spring-loaded. You could build all kinds of crazy things with that, things to annoy your parents by making loud noises at night. And I was always interested, again, doing unexpected things. I wanted to push the technology. I had a TV in my room, which was pretty styling for, late 60s. It was black and white. But I didn't just want to watch the TV just to watch the shows. I wanted to fiddle with the antenna and the UHF stuff to see. I was in LA, I wanted to see if I could get San Diego. If I turned the antenna just right, held my hand there, then I could get San Diego. I remember my dad walking into my room saying, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm trying to get San Diego on the TV." He's like, "We have perfectly good stations here in Los Angeles. Why are you trying to get San Diego?" "Because it's cool." And later on, after the analog electronic stuff, I branched out into TTL digital circuits and breadboarding. Love the 7490 decade counter and 555 timer. Anybody play with that kind of stuff? Yeah, I imagine there's quite a few. But I never was very good at soldering. Actually improved a little bit here last night with the grid stuff. So that's a good thing. And in 1978, I hit the jackpot. I discovered computers. And, it was interesting, the talk from the gentleman from Fickle Brothers. I'm terrible with names. What was his name?
Brand.
Yeah. He was mentioning how he had started out with Fortran programming and how he'd have to pencil in the codes. It wasn't even a key punch. It was more of a pencil punch. And I brought one of these along. You guys can pass it around. This is the kind of programming that I did when I was in middle school. We had to do our Fortran programs, and we actually had to pencil in the holograph codes for these things. I'll pass that around in case folks haven't had a chance to see one of those. That's how I got started. And I remember when the light bulb went on. One day I was writing a program. The first program they have you do is just do a comment of your name. And it was cool to get a piece of paper back, computer printed with my name. That was fun. But it didn't really seem like programming. It was just like a comment. But then when we did a loop, you could actually see your name with a do loop printed 5 times. All of a sudden, how to program computers hit me like a ton of bricks. The light bulb went off. I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. This is the coolest thing in my life. And I was content with the 2-day turnaround that we'd have, taking those cards, filling them out, sending them downtown to the mainframe and coming back. It was pretty onerous, but hey, it was programming. That was awesome. But then, my instructor, we didn't have a personal computer. This was 1978. And I think this is when it was first getting started in schools. But my instructor had an Apple II and decided to bring it in so that us middle schoolers could pound around on it. And just, God bless Mr. Desmond, because when I walked in the first day, I asked people, "Hey, what is this?" And they said, "That's a computer." I was like, no. A computer's a giant box downtown somewhere that we send those funky cards to. They said, "No, that is a personal computer. You can actually sit there and do things on it, and you get the feedback right away." And it was like the clouds parted and the light shone down and the angels sang. I was like, oh my gosh, that is the coolest thing ever. Immediately started to work on how you would program this guy, how you write games for it. Actually wrote a cute little game that you play with paddles that we called Target. You had to work together with a partner. You controlled the horizontal, the partner controlled the vertical, and little dots would appear on the screen. You had to tune in, dial it in, and then hit the button to shoot the dots. This is when I discovered backups, because I made the program, and we didn't have a disk drive, we only had a cassette recorder. And at one point, halfway through recording my program, somebody tripped over the plug. And so my program was gone. It was in limbo. And I didn't have a backup. I had made another second cassette copy of that, and I had recorded over my first one. So backups, people, yes, it was love at first sight. I mean, you got to admit, everybody here knows the Apple II is a beautiful machine. Cosmetically, it's nice to look at as well as nice to use. And this interactive programming gig where you could actually write a program and try it out on the fly. It was a lot better than waiting for the punch card jobs. It was a lot more exciting too. I mean, here you had graphics, you had sound, it wasn't just raw printouts. Oh, I talked about the target here. I guess I'm getting a little ahead of myself. And so I decided that this was so cool that I had to have one at home. So I dragged my dad to one of the local computer stores in the LA area. And LA was, a hot spot for computing. So we had tons of retail stores. And I just begged him to get me one of these Apple IIs. Now, can somebody tell me, well, first off, who in here messed with an Apple II anytime in 1977, the year they came out? Nobody? All right, 1978. Okay, see, I was thinking I'm among the first. So this was 1978, and so, a disk drive, wow, what a luxury. But I kept thinking, if I just needled my dad for long enough, he'll buy me one of those. I don't remember what an Apple II costs with a decent amount of memory and a disk drive in 78.
I paid in '79. I bought an Apple II Plus, one of the first ones. I was expecting a 2. 48K. I don't think I had bought the memory card yet, and no disk drive yet, and that was $1,800.
That sounds about right. I mean, I was kind of thinking in the $2,000 range, and I told my dad, okay, there's these people springing up, home programmers in their garage, and they're making games, and they're making money, and it's really cool. So if you buy me one of these things, for sure we'll be on easy street. I mean, I'll buy you a house, I'll buy you a car, I'll buy you whatever you want. And I definitely am almost kind of sure that would have happened. But I'll never know because I couldn't convince him to buy me one. So when I left middle school and started high school, they didn't have Apple IIs. They had instead TRS-80s. So not as exciting, didn't have the color, but the basic language was actually pretty good. And again, I was determined to have computer time. It didn't really matter to me. I discovered this love of programming. And so I went with what I had. And the other thing we had was, this is an ASR33 teletype with punch tape. And we could dial up the DEC system downtown and program on this thing. And even though it wasn't exciting like a microcomputer, it was still interactive. I mean, you were typing and stuff was coming back to you in real time. So that was still cool. So what I did for computing was whatever I had to do for computing. And this is what set me off into this kind of eclectic future that I would have with computers. Why, almost like a butterfly, floating around, never really lighting in one place for a long time. The other thing that our school got was a pet. And now, you understand, we had a lot of enthusiasts in 1978 who wanted to do computing. And so the TRS-80 was tied up a lot of the time, and the teletype was tied up for a decent amount of the time. But nobody wanted to touch this computer. Can anybody guess why? Let me give you a hint. So in the 8th grade, I learned how to be a touch typist. And I literally learned how to be a touch typist on the PET computer. Because I thought, this is one that I don't have to compete for. I don't have to throw elbows to use a computer. And this started me down my kind of, Commodore obsession. And I thought it was kind of cute. I mean, this cassette drive was the most reliable thing that I ever used in my life. It never ate a cassette. I never had a problem loading a program back. It was just rock solid. And I kind of like the graphic characters on the keyboard. They call them Petsky characters. So I thought this computer had some attributes going for it. It didn't have any sound, again. Didn't have any color. But it didn't have the cutesy little graphics characters. At this point, as I'm coming up on my senior year in high school, I'm deciding I have to find a job in computers. This has got to be my future. So I worked at a couple of computer stores. This one, Computique, was a small chain of computer stores in Los Angeles. So was this one, HW Computers. HW was a really nice storefront where we had these beautiful kind of padded embroideries on the wall. We had nice setups for people to come in. Very leisurely. You could come in and explore computing. Now here at Compute, we did have apples. So again, the Apple II wafted back into my life. But when I left Compute and went to HW, we didn't have apples. So the Apple II wafted out of my life again. HW computers actually had some high dollar CP/M systems that at that time I never really was very interested in, and I don't know why. But they had Atari 400s and 800s. Those were the 8-bit computers there. Those did have color, those did have sound, they did have fun graphics, and so I learned to program and work with those and to sell them.
Candy chip or something.
They had the 6502.
What's the problem?
Yep, same as the Apples, same as the Commodore stuff. So at this point, I've lost Apple II access at school, but there was still work when I was working at Compute. And our high school was part of the Los Angeles Unified School District, and there's a contest that used to run every year from an aerospace company called the Rockwell Computer Science Competition. I decided I wanted to enter this, and I had the most mileage over time programming the Apple, so I wanted to do that, but I didn't have one at school anymore. So, but I had my friend Andy, a different Andy, and I would camp out at his house, and I used the Apple II for this large-scale programming effort. What this meant was, at school, I wasn't doing any programming. So I just show up to school, and my computer instructor knew I was working on this nights and weekends, and so he just let me pretty much sit there and talk with people and help others and plan. And it was a great time, but I got really a lot deeper into Apple II programming at this point. AppleSoft, nothing in assembly language. And I'm trying to remember, if you want to access, this was DOS 3.3, if you want to do things like write records and read records and stuff like that from AppleSoft, how do you do that again? What, isn't there some like character prefix that you need to talk to the DOS?
There's a read and write.
Control D.
There's a read and write command.
Right.
And if you
Control
wanna do
D.
it to the, yeah,
Control
Control
D.
D.
Yes,
if you
Print
output
CHR
Control D.
$4 before any DOS command.
That's, thank you.
Is there a print for the Control D?
Yeah.
And that's how you'd send commands out to the disk drive and retrieve stuff?
Yes.
Yeah, wow, I haven't thought about that in years. This is a huge program. A little side story on that. My instructor had bugged me to enter this contest in the 10th and 11th grade. I hadn't done it. I waited for my senior year. They got the program and they said, well, this must be plagiarism. This program is too professional and too good to have been done by an individual student, so we're throwing it out of the competition. And my heart was broken because a lot of my friends who knew me as a computer geek, I mean, my friend Arthur and I had our pictures in the school paper that year as the, computer geniuses. And a lot of people expected that we would win that competition. Arthur got $100 out of that competition for programming a game, the name of which he ripped off from me. It was called Toast the Quimnax. And I thought, gosh, I should have written a game. And I still, ever since then, I've wanted to write a game called Toast the Quimnax, so I'm going to do that someday. But ultimately, Nirvana. I got a computer for home. And the reason was, I couldn't afford one, but the computer store that I was working for had a policy that they would send a home computer to your home and let you have it for as long as you worked there for educational purposes, so that you could sell them more easily and be more knowledgeable. I thought that's a fantastic deal. So the first computer that I actually ever had in my house was an Atari 800. So you see how I'm kind of bouncing all over the place? This is why I left my first love, because I just chased computing wherever I could get it. Which next led me to, well, it's cool to have a computer at home. It would be better to own a computer at home. And I had a friend of mine, my great friend Eric at the time, who came, he had actually suggested that we try to build our own 8085 based computer. And I thought, wow, that's kind of nuts, really, build our own? He said, no, you could do it. The 8085 chip is great for interfacing, you don't need that many outboard chips. But then he came running to me practically with his hair on fire, saying, there is a color computer that we can afford, that mere mortals or starving students, as I was at the time, could get. It's the VIC-20. And of course, Jack Tramiel always had this saying, computers for the masses, not the classes. And this thing was already heavily discounted, but I got employee discount. I loved it. So I did pick up a VIC-20. It's my first computer. Oh, the story here, 22 columns, baby, and Shatner, is because Bill Shatner, before the Star Trek movies had really rebooted, he was actually a little bit cheaper to get as a spokesperson. So he did the commercials for the VIC-20, the wonder computer of the 80s. Anybody ever see those?
Sure.
On YouTube. Yeah, you can YouTube those.
Who manufactured that?
What's that?
Commodore.
The Commodore VIC-20.
Was it 6502?
It was. The VIC-20 again, 6502 chip. So I guess I'm kind of consistent until Epson came along. I'm sticking with 6502 based systems, but all of a sudden I took a drastic right turn. I had this dream of working for a computer company. And a lot of the computer companies were not based in LA, they were based in Silicon Valley, or of course Commodore was based back east. But there was a computer company, also a premier printer company, that had its main US offices in Torrance, city that I lived in. So I got a job there after a lot of harassing the HR people. Have you looked at my resume? Have you looked at my application? You know, just calling on a weekly basis, desperate for a job there. Finally they said, whatever, if you'll shut up, we'll give you a job. So I went to work for Epson. My first job was a technical writer for them, and then eventually got into technical support for their portable computers. This guy here, a CPM laptop computer, is generally considered one of the first laptops in its class with a full productivity suite. It had a word processor and a database and a variety of things like that. This is one of the first laptops ever, the HX20. 20 column by 4 character LCD screen, but really early on. I'd actually played with this guy when I was working in retail. So they moved me to the tech support group for the portable computers, which was a lot of fun. They gave me one of each. So I had 3 computers at home. I was seriously styling, and a little battery-powered acoustic coupler, all kinds of, wild technological advancements here. Another funny story, William F. Buckley Jr., syndicated columnist, I had a brief run-in with him. He actually, I won't use the word slander, but I will say that he said things that I believe are not true about me personally in his syndicated column. What happened is the Epson PR department had given him one of these Geneva, the CPM-based laptops, and he didn't like the way the keys were positioned. So he called in one day and said, I want to change the keys around. I said, well, because he was telling me this thing's different and all the other computers are better. And having worked with, I don't know if it's going to take me too long to back up. Anyway, you saw all those computers I worked with. I knew that all the keyboards were different on all of these things. None of them were exactly like a typewriter, and I tried to convey this. Well, you didn't want to hear any of them. So I said, I think some of our advanced tech department might be working on a little memory wedge where you can remap the keys and make them any way you want. And he was enthusiastic about that, so I transferred him. To make a long story longer, later on, people were walking around and saying, hey, Earl, you made the paper, good job. What are you talking about? I walked down the hall. We were great at hazing each other back in those days. Some other people would say, hey, you're famous. I was like, okay, somebody tell me what's going on here. He'd written an article that was talking about the terrible technical support at Epson and the terrible service he'd received from this guy named Earl Evans, and how he didn't want to have anything to do with Epson. So I thought, gosh, I was really friendly with the guy and extremely, I actually didn't know who he was. Maybe that's what irritated him. I didn't know he was famous. But so Epson got an apology, and I got the computer back and everything like that. But nowadays I look back on it and I laugh and I think, wow, I'm immortalized. Now here's where I made the giant jump. There was a transition in computing from the 8-bitters to the kind of 8/16-bitters to the full-on business, kind of IBM's, stuff like that. The Atari ST, the Apple II GS, the Amiga. And I completely blew past that generation, and I'm really sad I did, because those were some fantastic and interesting machines. But when I got my job at Hughes, we had originally just IBM PCs. And then eventually, through some very enthusiastic and persistent fans, wound up supporting the Macintosh line of computers as well. Starting, my first one that I had at work was a Mac Plus, and we kind of went from there. So this consumed a huge amount of my life. Things like programming in database languages with DBase 3 and Clipper was a compiler for DBase. The PS2 line that came out with this new microchannel architecture and 386s and networks, Novell networking. Wow, that was like, I can't believe it. I've got a computer, you've got a computer, they can talk to each other, they can share a printer, they can do all these kind of things. So I just, head first, I was into this. Even did some IBM mini computer programming for Hughes while I was there. They sent me to Houston for some classes on the 4360 series. So again, I'm kind of all over the road. You know, I'm a PC guy, I'm a Mac guy, I'm a IBM mini computer guy, but it's computing. Even had my first exposure, early exposure to Linux while I was there. So now, this work on these computers kept going for a long time. And I wound up, I bought my own Compaq at home. I stayed in the IBM world, made a lot of money programming DBase programs in Clipper, and didn't really, again, get to touch those 816 machines. All of a sudden, we're up to Y2K. And I never thought much about the past. I was always, you know, Mr. Tech, looking forward. But this magical thing called eBay came along that Weird Al calls the worldwide garage sale, and that's kind of what it is. I just, on a lark one day, thought, gosh, VIC-20s were fun. And I'm not really having nearly as much fun anymore. This is all business stuff. I wonder if there's a VIC-20 on eBay. And I found one. It was in really good condition. And so I bought it. And then after that, it wasn't too long before I started thinking, I wonder if some of the other computers that I played with are out there on eBay. And I bought an Apple II. And this wised me up to the fact that when you buy things on eBay, people might not package them properly because it came with a crack. But this one was just a hairline fracture, easy to repair with some super glue. So now I had an Apple II. Wow, I could never afford an Apple II back in the day. Now I finally have an Apple II. You know, I'm a little late to the party, only 8 years after it was completely discontinued, but I thought, this is great, I own my own. And like I say here, dangerous, because I discovered at the time how cheaply you could get these old retro computers. And my house began to immediately fill up with vintage computers. So I thought about this, I thought, you know, there's this cool new thing called the internet. And I wonder if there's anyone else out there that's interested in vintage computing. And I went out and I found a couple mail lists. I found some of the Usenet groups, and some of those were in good condition, and others were extremely hostile. For whatever reason, the Commodore group on, maybe they had Apple envy or something, but the Commodore group on Usenet is just, it was a constant flame war. And it almost, this kind of thing almost scared me out of vintage computing, but I thought, no, you know, this is a burgeoning thing. I think I'm going to make a website. So I thought long and hard for a name. I got the name Retrobits.com. This little graphic here was from my original website in the year 2000. And I titled a blog entry, I didn't even know the word blog then, but put an entry, everything old is new again, and started to really get into the vintage computer hobby. A little bit of that, and you know, I won't go into, you know, all of the personal stuff, but business was tough, right? In 2001, we had the dot-bomb, and I'd been in that business, and so it just kind of discouraged me from a lot of things, including this hobby. And so I jumped out of that for a little while, but around 2005, I was listening to podcasts, and I thought, podcasts are cool, and I don't think, and I love it, it makes my computer work so good, listening to these amateur podcasts. There's not one for vintage computing. Hey, maybe I should do this. So I did one. I called the first show Vic, it was on VIC-20, and kind of went from there. And the show topics, again, kind of with this eclectic way that my life went, had a number of specific computer models. Over time, we'd even include some of the stuff from Europe and Asia, and that I hadn't really touched, but a lot of the listeners wrote in and said, hey, you should cover these. And Retrobits always was a non-specific podcast. There are other podcasts out there that might cover a specific language or cover a specific computer model, but just like my life, I was always all over the road on my podcast. But it has covered a lot of Apple II stuff, including great interviews with Ken and with Andy. You and I spoke. Who else did I speak to? I know I spoke with Ivan. And I was always interested in coming to KansasFest, like I say. Now I'm here today. So after all of that craziness, what does the Apple II hold for me for the future? Well, I can tell you I'm going to be programming in short and supermodel, because that was a really cool presentation. And I want to get back into Apple II programming. This time I want to see how far I can dive into the 6502 code stuff as opposed to just, kind of scratching the surface in AppleSoft. And some of the add-on devices, not just for the Apple II, but for a variety of computers, if you buy them for everything, you could just totally break your piggy bank. So I have to be selective on which sort of things I add on. Definitely one of the things that I'm interested in is getting one of those CFA cards eventually, because I've heard that just makes your life wonderful on the Apple II, whichever kind you have. But this has also inspired me, being here at KansasFest, hearing the great presentations, and seeing firsthand what I've already seen on the internet, that the Apple II world is very vibrant. There's lots of things, there's even a handful of things that come out these days in the software realm or are still covered that are commercial. And it's amazing, all of these years after the Apple II was even discontinued, that people are still making things either for giveaway or for sale. So that's my story of why I was extremely promiscuous in my computing. Do you have any questions?
Do you have any illegitimate computer offspring?
Well, I have more computers in my house than anything else, and I think a lot of people would say that qualifies. Did you have a question, Ken?
Yeah, on your show you mentioned writing a game for the Commodore. How are you going to balance doing that while you want to write a game for the Apple II?
Well, I think the Commodore will have to come first, at least in the prototype stage, because it's my project that I'm doing for the Retro Challenge. And so I need to get that done by the end of July. And so I will have to somehow curb my enthusiasm to jump on Superman and Short when I get home for a couple of weeks until I can get that Commodore thing further along. What Ken is mentioning is that a buddy of mine created a device for the Commodore that is both a drive emulator and an internet connection. And you can actually talk HTTP over this device from a Commodore. And one of the things that it doesn't have yet is a lot of software supporting its capabilities. And I want to write a reversey game. Othello is the trademark name for it. People who write it on computing call it reversey so they don't get sued. I want to write one of these that you can play with someone else over the internet in real time. It's actually coming along okay.
Well, and it seems like an Apple, you could have an Apple playing the Commodore.
You could,
Actually, it's
if
going to be
you did it
over the
right.
internet.
Yeah.
That would be a good second project.
Might be interesting to write basically the same program for two different platforms, just to see how they compare.
Yes. Yeah, that'd be a good contrasting. Did you have something?
Yeah, I don't know if you already mentioned this, but in the Commodore world, do you have a mass storage device like the CFFA that you recommend?
It is a similar device. I think it doesn't have some of the functionality of the CFFA. For instance, it can't take a USB stick, but it uses an SD card for storage. It's called the micro SD, and it plugs into the same disk drive Daisy chain that the rest of your disk drive or printer devices would plug into on a Commodore, and lets you use the SD card as mass storage. And you can put disk images on there, or I think you can put actually individual programs on there too, either way. Anything else? Thanks.